Welcome to the Exemplar Effect, a podcast that explores the power of role models and mentors to inspire and transform our lives. I'm your host, Steve Steen, and in today's episode, I'm talking to Kyle Perrotti. He's a journalist and editor at Smoky Mountain News in Western North Carolina. Kyle grew up in Washington State, and his career has taken him from working on board a nuclear submarine with the Navy to the halls of Columbia University. We'll hear from Kyle about the people who have most influenced his life, including a commanding officer who helped him turn his life around, and a dean who encouraged him to pursue his passion for journalism. We'll also talk about the importance of mentorship in Kyle's own life and how he's paying it forward by mentoring young journalists. Kyle's story is a reminder that we all have the potential to be role models for others, and that even the smallest acts of kindness and compassion can have a profound impact on the world around us. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for checking us out. Kyle Perrotti, welcome to the Exemplar Effect podcast. I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and talk to me. This podcast has been an idea that's been kicking around in my head for a number of years. I really believe that we are kind of a product of the people who have influenced us. I believe that we're kind of like these people, these exemplars that we're going to talk about today. I really believe that they're kind of the ingredients to the recipe that is our life. And one of the things that I really struggled with, I'm a nostalgic guy. The older I get, the more nostalgic I get and the more appreciative I get for the people who have kind of gotten me to where I am today. The way it started is I found myself just like journaling about these guys, about these people who affected me. And I really struggled with identifying what it is that I'm looking for, what it is that I want to talk about. I didn't feel like the term role model or even mentor actually fit the mold of what it was that I was looking for. That was one of my biggest hangups. That was one of the biggest things that I struggled with getting this podcast off the ground, is kind of explaining what it was. And I was just doing a bunch of research. I'm an uneducated man, and I was doing a bunch of research trying to like hone in on what it was. And I landed on the exemplar effect. And I did that because the term exemplar, the definition of exemplar, is a person or thing as a typical example or excellent model. And that's exactly that's it. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So welcome to the show, and let's get into kind of who are your exemplars. And a little bit about, introduce yourself, just a little bit about who you are too. Let's talk about who you are, and then let's get into your exemplars.
Sure. Yeah. And as far as my exemplars, it's kind of interesting because they were at different, very distinct phases in my life. So a little background is probably good. I'm in North Carolina now, but I grew up in Washington State, Central Washington. Didn't really have much direction. Didn't really do much in high schools. Played some sports, didn't get good grades. Didn't know what I wanted to do, so joined the Navy. And ended up going into the submarine force as a nuclear operator, which was a tremendous challenge. And to be completely honest, I didn't particularly like it. But, stuck it out, finished up my enlistment, got my discharge, honorable discharge, and then used the GI Bill to go to Columbia in New York City, which was a pretty big leap from graduating high school with like a 2.4. But, as we get into the story, you can kind of see a little bit about how certain people helped me along the way, and also just kind of a matter of circumstance to a degree. Anyways, after Columbia, I wanted to leave New York City. Actually had some decent job prospects, but just kind of wanted to get back to the mountains, being from Washington State. I've always liked mountains, hiking, camping. So found a job here in Western North Carolina in the Smokies and moved to Maggie Valley. And it feels like I just get kind of dug into the mountain more every year. And I don't really see myself leaving.
That's quite a transition going from working on the nuclear submarine and not really liking it a whole lot to landing in Colombia. What was that transition like? How did you go from there to there?
The transition was glorious. I liked living in New York City, even though I was ready to leave. I was very ready to be done with the Navy. And actually, what had happened is when you're on a submarine out to sea, you work a lot, but you also have a lot of free time and obviously not a lot to do. You can't just walk out the door. And I became fond of reading, even though I don't think I read a single book in high school. I started reading and really liked it and started journaling and writing. Started reading a lot of nonfiction writers and journalists like Joan Didion, Hunter S. Thompson, Tom Wolfe, some of those types. And they had a big impact on me because I kind of saw something that I'd written off as maybe not being interesting. And it actually ended up being really, once I was exposed to it, the only thing I could imagine doing. And so I worked hard to try to get into some good colleges and managed to get into Columbia, which, was kind of the dream school, and studied writing, worked at the school paper, and I was kind of just off to the races as soon as I think the first book I read was maybe something by Hunter S. Thompson.
What was it about his words that stuck? Like, how did you relate to them?
I think what I liked is that, when he wrote, he had a sense of humor, and he could have a little bit of bite to his words, but oftentimes buried underneath that was just incredible analysis. His book, his Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, covered 1972 presidential race. And it was just such good analysis and such dense analysis, kind of like wrapped up in stories about drinking beer and doing acid and making all the politicians angry. And so there was humor, but there was so much insight.
One of the things that I get into on the show and I talk to folks about that I'm fascinated with is the characteristics of the exemplar, right? Like, what is it about this person that made them special? Because there's a lot of people who try to give back. There's a lot of people who do a good job at what they do, but they're not as relatable as others. And one of the top characteristics that folks have shared with me on the show that seems to be a common theme in these exemplars is a sense of humor, right? It really is. Like, that's what makes people relatable. It seems like that's how we kind of, it's what draws us to each other or attracts us to each other, is that, that sense of humor. So I'm the same way.
Yeah. And, when you first sent me the email inviting me onto this, I got to thinking about people that I've known, leaders I've known over time, going all the way back to high school. And there are so many good leaders that I know, but I think of the ones who had maybe the biggest impact, and exemplar is a perfect word because they're leaders. The two people that I thought of after some time were two people who I maybe wasn't closest with, but people who had an effect on me by just being the perfect example of how to lead, how to care about your people, how to care about your mission, and then how to actually execute. And so it's kind of funny that the way you describe exemplar, because it was exactly how I was thinking about it.
I really like the way you went with it, because a lot of the people that I've written about and a lot of people that I've identified as exemplars were very indirect relationships. They weren't people that were present with me for large portions of my life. They weren't people that, like, if you ask them who I am, they would possibly have no idea. It's just people whose words spoke to me, people who came into my life for just short periods of time. So yeah, let's get into it. Who do you got? Who do you want to recognize?
So they're two men from two very distinct periods in my life. One was from my time in the Navy, and one was from my time at Columbia. And they have very similar characteristics, but their presentation, kind of their style couldn't be more different. One is Ollie Lewis, who was the commanding officer of the USS San Juan when I was there. And actually, when I was on the San Juan, there was a different commanding officer originally. I wasn't super fond of him. Again, never was super fond of the Navy. and Ollie Lewis came along, and first of all, it's kind of funny thinking of him on a submarine. The guy's about 6'6". So he stood out already because he was a head above everyone else. And he's really serious, kind of a conservative guy. I don't even necessarily mean that politically, just, really stoic, really a little more quiet, a little more thoughtful. And he's from Louisiana, and actually he had a tremendous sense of humor, despite the fact that he was such a stoic guy. He'd kind of catch you off guard with a joke, which is interesting. The dynamic between a junior enlisted guy like me and an officer like that, the fact that he was willing to kind of bridge that gap of humor sometimes showed that he wanted to connect with his sailors. But anyways, so Ollie Lewis, I guess I can start by just kind of describing the military in general. There's the old adage, people say that alcohol kind of just amplifies your personality. The military, when it comes to leaders, kind of just amplifies your deficiencies or abilities as a leader. I've met bad leaders who just, they just make your life terrible, not productive. And there are plenty of those in the military. But someone like Ollie Lewis, his good leadership traits were just amplified, especially during hard times, which we saw plenty of. And he just was always cool. Again, he always approached stuff with kind of a dry sense of humor. But there's really one instance in particular that I think showed his leadership, and it was when I screwed up tremendously. I'd messed up something back in the engine room, a log I was supposed to take that I didn't take, totally my fault. And it was, I've been chewed out before, but the way he chewed me out was, it put like the fear of God in me. And, I knew I screwed up, and he took me to captain's mast, which is like basically the means of punishment, handed down a punishment. And then I spent the last week of deployment while everyone else was kind of enjoying time with their family. I spent the last week of deployment, or before deployment, on the boat, loading supplies, cleaning stuff, just doing all the work no one else wanted to do. And it was, it was pretty terrible. And then went on deployment and kind of started to turn things around. And what I think was so impressive is the way that then Commander Lewis, now he's actually an admiral, which is probably a testament to his leadership. But at that time, I think he started to see that I was trying to turn it around, and he didn't hold a grudge. He didn't let that linger over his opinion of me, or, he didn't hold it over me in any way. And as he saw me developing and becoming better at my job, despite the fact that I think he knew I didn't like it much, he really started to try to help me along and try to develop me not only as a sailor, but kind of as a person. He would talk to me one-on-one all the time, called me up to his stateroom to talk. And it was, again, kind of his commitment to his sailors, which it's easy for an officer to kind of just sequester themselves to their stateroom and not have to deal much with the enlisted people. But I think he realized that it's important to have those relationships, because when it hits the fan, you have to know that you can trust each other. And he was always good at maintaining that relationship. And within that, he would rely on us, even junior enlisted people, as experts on our systems on the submarine. And he wouldn't think he knew better. He was very decisive. He'd always make the final decision, but he'd always factor in who was telling him or who was advising him and what they were telling him. And he was able to listen to people and factor that into decisions.
Did he treat every sailor in a similar manner, or do you think that he saw something in you? And if he did, what was that?
He treated all sailors, well and with respect. And those who were doing their job well, or those who I guess were making an honest effort to do their job well, he would really, I think he just gave him his respect, even though he didn't really have to. Again, it's kind of a stereotype that a lot of officers don't feel like they have to give respect to junior enlisted guys. Well, now women also on submarines, but anyways, with me in particular, I think he knew that I wasn't very fond of the Navy. And his thing with me was he would tell me, just do your job to the best of your ability. Like, you're here, you're going to be here, you're not leaving anytime soon. Do your job to the best of your ability. And, we don't necessarily need to see eye to eye. You don't need to stay in the Navy. Like, usually there's a big push for people to reenlist. And I had some people who were terrible to me because I was vocal about not wanting to reenlist. And, but he very much understood that. And when I was able to do my job and earn his respect, he actually was one of the driving forces in getting me into Columbia, which to me, it's like the goal of everyone is to try to get the goal of officers and senior enlisted is to try to get enlisted people to stay in the Navy. So what he was doing was kind of counter to that, but he was doing what was best for me.
And you recognize that at that time? You felt it at that time?
I did. And it was all of this was almost predicated there was an undertone of, or I guess in the back of my mind, I always considered the one time that I was just terrified of him, when he was chewing me out. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind, and it almost made it all the more impressive that he was so willing to go to bat for me. He was the one that told me about Columbia, and about a program that they have where they accept a higher number of veterans than most other schools of that caliber. So he told me about that program. He worked with me as far as navigating like school visits and stuff, wrote me a tremendous letter of recommendation, did way more than he had to do to get me into Columbia, which again is kind of counter to the mission of getting people to reenlist. And I think that shows that he's willing, he was is still a great military leader.
Do you think that the way you responded to that first chewing out and the way that you handled yourself by staying back and cleaning and doing all the kind of duties that you needed to do while everyone else was visiting with families before deployment, do you think that that played a role in it? Just the way that he observed you respond to that situation?
Yeah, I think so. And there's another part to the story that I haven't really told many people. It's kind of funny. Is I went to captain's mast. That's what it's called. It's a form of non-judicial punishment, which basically they can take your money, take your rank. Didn't take rank, but took half month's pay for 2 months. And then once I stayed and worked before deployment, I was doing pretty well on deployment. He pulled me up to his stateroom and said, I want you to know that I've really appreciated how far you've come, and that I've decided to rip up the papers from the captain's mast, and it won't be on your record. And all I ask is that, you keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be good. And I was like, all right, that's, great. And then we pull into port. We pulled into a port call one day, and I looked at my LES, which is leave and earnings statement, kind of like a pay stub in the military. And, it said NJP minus, half month's pay times 2. And it turned out that one of the sailors who worked an administrative job decided to kind of be a hard charger and be on top of his job, and sent off the papers before getting, the final confirmation to, which really, again, kind of just another way to embitter me toward the military. But, I still tried to kind of keep doing my job like I was doing even after that. And I think that was something that maybe helped me gain his respect, was in the face of something that, truly got screwed over. I was willing to at least have enough faith in him.
Moving on to Columbia, what was y'all's relationship like? Did you maintain a relationship with him at all? Did you maintain any type of contact with him?
Yeah, I did, to a degree. I wouldn't say we were like great friends and we didn't talk all the time, but we'd write back and forth. Every once in a while, I worked for the school paper. I'd write something, and I'd see that he commented on it, and, it'd always be very encouraging stuff. And, sometimes I wouldn't hear from him for a year, and then he would comment on an article and, just kind of giving me props. And, we're friends on Facebook, and we'll message back and forth every once in a while. And I think he maybe feels a degree of pride in how far I've come as a journalist, and even just personally, because I think he played a major role in setting me on the right path. And I think he probably feels a degree of pride in that.
How did you develop as a man during those years of at Columbia, going from kind of a borderline disgruntled sailor to, really having to dive into the studies?
They were both tremendously difficult things. Both were a ton of work. Both were really trying at times. But I think the difference was that in the Navy, I was just counting down the time until I was done. Stick it out, put your head down, get done. At Columbia, I was driven toward a goal. So the work was so much more fulfilling, even though it was really difficult. And I enjoyed my time at Columbia, but again, just I was on the school paper. I was a sports editor there. Between that and studies and working and internships, it was just, it was maybe in some ways more stressful than the Navy, but it was all so worth it because every day you wake up, you're working toward that goal, which was a new feeling for me. I'd never experienced it in high school, never experienced it in the Navy.
Coming from that like high schooler with you said 2.4 GPA to being enrolled at Columbia and writing for the school paper. Did you ever see yourself doing something like that when you were younger, getting into journalism?
No way. When I first joined the Navy, I assumed I would get out of the Navy and go work at a power plant. That's what a lot of people do. And I have friends who make really good money. I have friends who really enjoy that kind of work. And that's kind of what I thought I would be doing. But once I got into the job and realized nuclear power itself was not my thing, and I found writing, it was so clear to me what I needed to do. So I was able to kind of work toward it. But prior to, again, I want to say it was a Hunter S. Thompson book or whatever it was that sparked me. Prior to that moment, even like the day before that moment, if you asked me if I would become something like a journalist, I probably would have laughed at you.
Did you even know that you had that potential in you, right? We were capable of doing something like that.
I don't think so. I was actually pretty good at math and science in high school, despite the poor grades. But as far as reading and writing, I was bored. I thought I would be bored by it. I didn't even give it a chance. I just, kind of assumed that it wouldn't be for me. And I had a lot of people along the way because I had bad grades telling me, almost reinforcing it negatively, saying you have bad grades, so you're not ever gonna be anything. Like, a lot of people almost giving me like a why try kind of attitude.
Did you join the Navy because of all those naysayers, because of the people pointing out the things that you weren't good at? Was that kind of like what led you to the Navy?
Yeah, kind of. It was, I'd actually had a long-term girlfriend in high school, broke up with her, didn't get into the couple colleges I applied to, and I just threw up my hands in the air and was like, you know what, let's do something drastic and just shake it up because there's nothing for me here. I set myself up for failure if I was going to stay where I was. I didn't really have any path, and I just wanted to do something.
I can just remember being a young man, being, 17, 18, 19 years old, and just feeling the pressure of making those decisions, feeling overwhelmed by having to decide what to do next. So I kind of avoided it. I took a step back. I had like a long-term job. I worked, retail management for the same company from the time I was like 16 till I was 26. But I just didn't want to, I was too afraid to take the risk of making any type of permanent decision. I was comfortable in this, retail management position because I had done it for so long that I just I couldn't take myself because I didn't have an exemplar in my life at that time to kind of direct me or just tell me that I was capable or show me the things that I was good at. So I just sat back in my comfort zone and did what I was good at. But to still take that some sort of risk, because enlisting is quite the commitment, right? You're signing up to be there for a specific amount of time. So where did that come from? Where did that kind of concrete decision and being willing to kind of step through a little bit of the comfort zone?
That's, to a degree, I would almost call it desperation because like I said, I kind of threw up my hands. I didn't know what else to do. I went to all the recruiters. I was actually like probably most young men, I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And I talked to all the recruiters, and the nuclear program in the Navy was great because they had a pretty good enlistment bonus, a good career path. And so that's how I ended up there. But it was a leap of faith. I'll never forget the day of the recruiter, taking me away to boot camp, and my mom like almost hanging on to the recruiter's arm, crying, trying to like pull me back. And it was all just so stark in that moment. And I definitely had my doubts. Boot camp sucked, kind of like you would imagine. And deployment sucked. Like all of it was tough. And there were a lot of times I regretted my decision. Ultimately, I don't. Even though I didn't like it, I'm glad I served.
Have you had a chance to let Ollie know how important that guidance was? Have you actually, thanked him for being there for you and kind of supporting you in a somewhat non-traditional way by like, helping you get into Columbia and kind of almost like take a risk on you, in a way?
I think I expressed it maybe in the moment to a degree, just my gratitude upon getting accepted to Columbia. I think I expressed my gratitude to him. But that was also about the same time that I was getting close to the end of my enlistment and was probably starting to act up a little more. But, I think most people who know me, my wife could certainly tell you that I'm not always the best at giving or receiving compliments or expressions of gratitude. So, maybe not as much as I could.
What would you say to him now, today, to this day? Here we are on the podcast,
That's a really good question. I think I would just tell him, thank you for being patient more than anything with me. Seeing that, I definitely hit a low point when I went to captain's mast and I screwed up. And it was totally on me. It was, I guess I would chalk it up maybe to laziness more than anything is what the error was, how the error happened. But, he saw that there was still potential, and he saw that there was still a reason to believe in me to a degree. And instead of just saying, oh, well, he's a crappy sailor, don't even need to deal with him. Instead, he tried to salvage something. And I think that's kind of what made him a unique leader, is that he cared enough about his people to see something beyond the current circumstances.
I asked that because I just recently, on Friday night, I had a chance to come face to face with one of my former exemplars. It was an indirect relationship. This guy was a member of a meditation group that I was a part of when I was a young man, and I was very confused. I was in early sobriety and kind of just getting started with that whole journey, and I didn't kind of know what to do. And I honed in on this meditation practice. And there was a couple old timers at this meeting at over here at an Episcopal church at WCU. And I would go to this morning meditation like once a week, every Monday, for like 2 semesters until my class schedule changed. And there was one guy that was there that just had been meditating for like 25, 30 years. And everything that came out of his mouth was just pure wisdom, And somewhere along the way, my class schedule changed and I kind of stopped going to the meetings, and I just lost track of these guys. And I was at work on Friday night. We had our big fundraiser. We do one fundraiser event, the Empty Bowl event. I don't know if you've heard of it, but we did that. And here I come. I see this man, Sandy, come walking across the dining hall. And it came across me. There was 300 people in this tiny little room. And it just came across me that I had to go up to him and thank him for his words. It wasn't any kind of like direct guidance, but just for his presence, the wisdom that he would share in these group meetings, basic practices in regards to like the meditation and stuff like that. But it was one of the most fulfilling moments that I've had in quite a while, to not to thank him, but to see his reaction to me praising him for what he did for me. Because in his world, he hardly remembered me. He didn't understand how truly impactful his words were. And that's one of the things that comes up a lot when we're talking about the characteristics of an exemplar, is that almost all of them are humble as heck. Like they don't do it for the recognition. Yeah. They are truly invested in you. Right. They do it for the, authentic purposes. You mentioned Ali was a good listener, right? He took y'all's recommendations seriously. What did that like as the person
Right.
on the other end for you? What did it feel like for you? Like, how did that part impact you? And did you recognize it at that time?
I did. There's one really good example, and I honestly don't think I can talk in exact detail about it, but I was a reactor operator, and we had an equipment malfunction underway out to sea that led to a somewhat stressful situation, to the degree that he came back to the control panels out in the engine room where I was operating the reactor. And it was, again, kind of stressful. I think he could sense kind of maybe a little bit of frenzied energy when he walked in. And at this time, actually, they just made it to where you couldn't smoke cigarettes on board. But he came in and he lit up a cigarette. I think he's probably quit smoking now, but he smoked, and he lit up a cigarette and was like, "Hey," he's like, "we got this." And he was very confident and calm. And he asked me my thoughts, and asked, there was an officer in the room also, asked the junior officer his thoughts, assessed the situation, took a moment, and then just handled it, gave me orders on how to recover that system. And it was an example of he took the time in a stressful kind of rush situation to listen to my thoughts, the other officer's thoughts, and then he gave concise orders. Again, he was decisive, but he knew that people had valuable input when it came to the systems they were experts on.
I wonder how you apply some of these skills that we're talking about today in your professional life today with Smoky Mountain News. Like, how does that reflect in your day-to-day life?
I think about it a lot. I'm the news editor, so I have a degree of editorial control. I work with the reporters, dictate what's going in each week's paper. So it's kind of the same thing. I more or less have the final say, but you have to understand that the people who cover those beats, we have Corey Valancourt, who covers a lot of politics, and sometimes we won't see eye to eye. But when I talk to him, I realize, like, this is a guy who's on that beat. I think he knows the politics of Western North Carolina better than any other reporter. I can't really think of anyone. So, we might disagree, but I'll listen to him and actually think back to Ollie a lot when I have those kinds of decisions, that it's important to remind yourself to listen.
It's so often the power kind of confuses us, or we kind of forget about that because of the leadership role, that we feel like we have to be the ones making the decisions, or we feel like we have to be the ones that makes the final call, when in reality they're the ones that are hands-on doing it day to day. They know. Who's the other person you want to talk about today?
The other person is Peter On, Dean Peter On. He was the dean of the School of General Studies at Columbia. The School of General Studies accepts non-traditional students, a fair amount of veterans. You actually get a fair amount of like actors and artists and musicians and stuff who did their thing and are coming back to school. Fair amount of people who maybe fell on hardship and then were finding their way back to school. So non-traditional students, there's, I think, to a degree, a stigma being at the School of General Studies compared to the main college. You take all the same courses. So there's no real distinguishable difference, but being kind of an older guy in a classroom, everyone knows your general studies. And I think, again, there's a little bit of a stigma. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about it. I didn't engage in School of General Studies events very often. There's a lot of veterans programs and, groups and stuff. And I steered clear of all those. Honestly, didn't like most of the veterans I met at Columbia. But Dean On had so much pride in that program, and, his, kind of like Island of Misfit Toys type thing. Like you had these people who had all these strange paths, and he just embraced all of it. And I actually didn't meet him for like the first 2 years I was at Columbia. My now wife was my girlfriend then, and she's a Marine Corps veteran. So we met there, and she was more involved in all that stuff. And we were walking down the street one day, and Peter on saw her and said, "Oh, hey," and talked to her for a while. And he was like, "Oh, who's this?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm, the School of General Studies as well." And he felt bad. I wouldn't say embarrassed, but, more just kind of like, God, like he wants to know all the students. So the next day he sent me an email and said, "I'd like to sit down and talk with you. Like, I saw that you're the sports editor at the paper, and saw the classes you're taking. I'm just interested in getting to know you." So he set aside a half hour. I went to his office, and, he's a busy guy. He's a dean of a college and a major school. But he set aside a half hour, and we probably talked for an hour and a half about everything. He's friends with Hunter S. Thompson's widow, Anita Thompson, because she actually went to School of General Studies, as did Hunter S. Thompson. And we talked about everything, philosophy, journalism, again, talked about Hunter S. Thompson, talked about just everything you can imagine. And he was in a lot of ways, he was the opposite of Ollie Lewis, where Ollie was more conservative and stoic. Peter he was a gay man. I wouldn't call him flamboyant, but he had he always wore a suit, and he always wore sandals with like bright colored socks. And, he was a little bit, of kind of an oddball, and he had a little bit of a goofy sense of humor. He was, I believe he was Lebanese. So, a gay man who grew up in the Middle East during a certain time where that was definitely not accepted. And was just really living his best life, doing his thing there. And he was so committed to his people and his mission. And after our long conversation, he would just check in on me all the time. He helped me when I was looking at grad schools. I ended up not going to grad school, but, he helped me through that process of determining whether I even wanted to go. And was just, again, kind of the common trait, I think, between him and Ollie, despite their differences. If you met them both, you would think they're, total opposites, but they both just cared so much about their people, and they both did way more than they had to help me out. Which, again, is a testament to their character.
To just take that time just from a simple meeting on the street and identifying that, hey, this guy's in my student body and I'm unfamiliar with him. So let me find out what this guy's all about, and to throw you that invitation. It had to feel so special.
I mean, it did. And that, I felt a little awkward with the invitation, but as soon as I started talking to him and, he told me some of his story, he lived a pretty fascinating life. I think at one point he joined priesthood before he went into academia. And he was a dean of the School of General Studies for like 20 years. And it was just a very unique path, which I could kind of relate to, having a unique path of my own. And he prized knowledge so much. And his whole life, he was a scholar, basically. His whole life was about knowledge. And that was something that I, again, hadn't really experienced. Like in the Navy, you care about your job and you have knowledge about your job. But, like if I was reading a book on cruise mess, which is kind of the common area, I'd probably get made fun of. Whereas at a place like Columbia with Dean On, I mean, he was thrilled to hear of the things that I was interested in.
How do you think he would describe you?
That's an interesting question. I don't know for sure how he would describe me. I certainly didn't have probably as close a relationship with him as Ollie Lewis. And he actually passed away in 2019. He was hit by a car in New York City. So, I don't know how I'd answer that question.
Did you guys maintain a relationship though throughout the rest of your time there? Did you continue to communicate with him on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think honestly, he was excited that there was a student from the School of General Studies at the school paper. It's mostly undergrad kids who were 18 to 21 or whatever. I think the time I was there, I was the only reporter from the School of General Studies. And I think he was excited to see someone kind of taking a different path. He loved the veterans groups and he supported them. Don't get me wrong there, but I think he was just excited to see someone from the School of General Studies succeeding somewhere that isn't typical. And so he did keep up with me a lot. He'd read my stories. Sometimes he'd send me emails about a story I wrote, just saying, oh, this is like just very encouraging. And it was almost how like Ollie Lewis commented on a couple of stories. You don't expect to see that email.
It's really just a testament to like their investment in you, because you recognize how busy both of those fellas are. And for them to be taking the time out of their busy day to read your stories, right, in the college paper, and then share feedback, right? That's like some of the most valuable stuff you could get at that point in your life, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, at that point, feedback is valuable, but what's most valuable, especially when you're early on in something that you care about and you're trying to get better, is just any form of encouragement. Anyone saying like, when you're still kind of uncertain about your skills, when someone says, oh, you're doing a good job, keep going.
Did you ever get a chance to thank the dean?
I did, graduation day. And it's so funny because I swear there's a picture of him and I on graduation day, and I tried to find it. And I couldn't find it anywhere, but yeah, I talked to him for a while on graduation day. And he was, wondering where I was going, what I was doing. I still wasn't even sure at that point. I only knew I wanted to leave New York City. But he was so encouraging, just saying, he basically said, it doesn't matter. Wherever you end up, you'll do well is kind of what he told me. He was like, don't worry about the uncertainty.
Where do you get that encouragement that you described a few minutes ago? Where do you get that today? Who gives you that?
I get it from different sources. Again, I feel more confident in where I am now. So maybe I don't feel quite as impacted by that encouragement when I get it. I definitely get it from work. I have a good boss here, Scott McLeod, who owns the paper, is tremendous as far as running a newspaper goes, because it's a hard business, and he is very encouraging of his reporters. He tries to recognize the good work that we do, and that goes a long way. And then, a lot of it's family, my wife, my father, who has very different political views and isn't really trusting of the media, but he'll read my stuff, and sometimes he'll be thrilled with an article, and that kind of means a lot because, again, I don't think he holds the media in the highest regard, but he'll read my stuff, and sometimes he'll just be thrilled with it.
So whether you want to admit it or not, just by your role in the community and the stuff that you put out, you yourself are an exemplar to future journalists, to the next generation, to the young person. Do you feel that? Do you recognize that? And if so, like what would you say to, I guess, like the, young man that aspires to become, young man or woman that aspires to become a journalist, say from, one of the local high schools in the area?
I like that role. And, I've had younger journalists who've worked with me at the Mountaineer and now here. And I think what I tell them is, journalism's hard. It's almost a cliche to say you're never going to get paid well, but you're never going to get paid well. A lot of times a lot of stories you write, there's going to be someone who doesn't like it from one angle or the other. So it's hard. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm, some kind of martyr or something, but it's a hard job. And if you really care about it and really like it, you'll get good at it. And again, it's almost like the mission, the mission matters. If you really care and you're committed, just keep pushing forward. And it's almost like what Dean Allen told me, you'll end up getting better every day at what you do. And that's what's important. It's a craft.
What's next for you? What do you got on your future radar, man? What are you looking at?
Well, I love Smoky Mountain news. So, staying here, working on some, pretty sizable stories. Been doing a lot of stuff about, the courts in this area, a lot of issues in the courts in Western North Carolina, and how, they've become more politicized. So that's something I've been really into. I started covering the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians because we lost our reporter who typically covered that. And she was tremendous. And that it's been a challenge, but I've really enjoyed how big of a challenge it is because they have a different form of government. Their politics are different. It's, it was kind of like a fish out of water experience, just getting thrown into this thing I don't really understand and learning about Cherokee and learning about the people and the culture has been a tremendous experience.
How do you challenge yourself like every day on a day-to-day basis to continue to improve, to continue to, develop your skills and become a better journalist?
I think it's about finding the big, tough story. It's for some people, it's easier to just pick kind of the low hanging fruit. But I think if you really care about what you're doing and you want to keep growing in it, you need to find challenges. And there's endless stories out there and endless stories that are tremendously complex and challenging, potentially controversial. And I think the more that you seek out those instead of seeking out what might be easy, the more you can grow in the field. And I don't think it's gone unnoticed. Sometimes I'll have certain people reach out to me. I actually did a story for the Assembly, which was a pretty big jump because that's a statewide publication. And through that I was communicating with Governor Cooper's office and high level folks in the courts. And it's kind of a thrill to be able to be thrust into that world, that other people couldn't even imagine. And you're able to get access and come to understand that world just pretty much solely because you're a journalist. So I just enjoy finding those challenges.
What do you do in your personal life? What are your hobbies? Like, how do you enjoy the mountains?
I love hiking. I hike with my dog. It's ramp season now, so I'm on the mountainside, picking ramps a lot. I love, like I said, I pretty much everything outdoors. I like reading. I like playing guitar. I play a few instruments, not well, but just, it's a good way, almost like you talk about meditation. It's a good way to kind of clear your mind. Play video games from time to time, not as much as when I was in high school, because I don't want to, that was part of what led to my 2.4, but, play video games from time to time. I love cooking. It's another one. And actually another place where I can kind of challenge myself is cooking. It's kind of fun to try new and challenging things and, just, really anywhere that I can challenge myself. No, it's funny. I fished growing up all the time. My wife's father loves fishing. I'll go fishing with him sometimes if we go up to Indiana. I've never been fly fishing, but I think I'm actually going fly fishing in like 2 weeks for the first time.
I grew up fishing in Tampa, Florida. Like we lived right off of the bay and I had a boat since I was a child and we just would, fish the flats and a little bit of offshore stuff. And I moved up here 10 years ago and it took about 5 years for me to actually even conquer the fear of trying to learn how to trout fish. But over the last 3 or 4 years, I've grown to absolutely love it. I haven't done any fly fishing. I just use a little like 4-foot spinner with like 4-pound test and just get in the creek and walk miles and miles and miles. That's one of my favorite things to do is just walk in the creek. I just love it. We've been hitting it hard the last couple of weeks, and I think that's what I'm going to do when we end this recording. It's on my day off, hit that up. So, how can people find you? Where are you at? You got anything you want to share or promote with the listeners before we wrap things up?
So you can follow me on Twitter for some news and occasional off-color humor at Kyle_Perrotti. Definitely encourage people to follow and read Smoky Mountain News. Always encourage people to read in print. Online is great, but I think our product is even better in print than online. And I think I love it when people engage critically with our work. And that's not necessarily criticizing it, but just thinking critically about what they're reading, because that's the way that we try to write it. So I would encourage someone to pick up the paper, read a few stories, and try to really think about how what's written in the Smoky Mountain News can impact your life.
Beautiful. Kyle, it's been a pleasure to get to know you, man. I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much, dude.
Yeah, thank you.